Hey all, I'm Lawrence, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Dirty Basement Terrain. Why Dirty Basement Terrain? Well, I'm making terrain, I'm in the basement, and it's dirty. In this episode, we're going to be making acid pit trap tiles for your dungeons. Why? Because why not? I'm going to show you how I do it. I'm not saying this is how you should do it, but I'm showing you a method and a way of doing something. If you don't like it, that's fine. Figure out, always do stuff the way you want to do it, not how someone tells you to do it. The only person you got to worry about when it comes to terrain making is your own self.
These first few steps are going to be pretty easy. I'm just using a chunk of what the Great Wylock states, mana from heaven, graphics medium weight chipboard. I'm going to try and cut out some 3x3 squares, so of course first I got to measure. And using my cheap plastic T-square here, which is more than enough for what I need. As you can see, I've already gotten all my measurements done, and of course you have to start cutting. I personally, when I'm cutting my chipboard, I like to use my Olfa knife. I never use scissors because of the frayed edges, curled up edges that the scissors can give. But with an Olfa knife or another, razor knife as such, it will take multiple passes, but you can get good straight cuts. And with a project like this, you do want straight cuts. And as you can see here, I got 9 squares, which is perfect for what I want. I've switched over to the Proxon. I'm going to use this scrap piece of foam I had that's 2 inches thick. I've already cut it to a 3x3 square because, of course, that's the size of the tiles we're going to be making. Now I'm going to adjust the Guider Pro on my Proxon to a 1/8 inch thick because I need thin layers in case I need to build up, use multiple layers, and that it stays thin enough that I can keep it from being thicker than the dungeon tiles themselves. Of course, I'm using a piece of scotch or masking tape to keep the guider from shifting while cutting. Some people will hold their hand on the tool. I prefer to actually just tape it down, and the masking tape seems to do the job. Of course, you want to keep it as low of a temperature as you can because you don't want to burn it, you just want to melt it. And obviously you can see here it worked out perfectly, a nice straight cut, done, and it fits perfectly on top of the 3x3 squares we made with the graphics medium chipboard. I finished running the block of foam through the Proxon, and I've gotten multiple layers of foam that I can use for the current project and possibly future projects. Now I've already glued the XPS to the graphics medium chipboard with some PVA glue. That's an unnecessary step to see. You all kind of figured out that you'll need it. Now what I'm trying to do here is melt the foam. Not burn it, but just melt it with quick controlled burst of fire. Is it the best way to do it? No, but I don't have a heat gun that's working right now, so I'm using a lighter. And if you watch, I'm just keeping the flame on in short controlled burst. I'm not having any smoke or nothing, just enough to melt the foam somewhat. And that's all you're going to want to do. Now we're grabbing another piece of foam that all the controlled burning or melting is done. And I'm using an X-Acto blade to roughly cut out a pattern of what the initial melting was on the first piece. I'm doing this so I can have like a raised edge to somewhat act like a dam for what's coming up. Now, there are other ways you can do this. You can do it by using putty to build up the edges or ridges and stuff, but I'm trying to avoid weight, so I'm sticking with foam here, and it just seems to work the best. For me, personally, that is. And of course, I'm going to grab some PVA, which I have in a cup here, and just brush it on as quickly. I should actually note that this is wood glue and not regular PVA, but wood glue, regular PVA, I would not recommend using hot glue for this though. Mainly because you want these pieces to be as close and as flat together, and with the hot glue you're going to wind up with a little bit of a gap that, while it's really not completely important, it does matter in a tiny bit. So PVA is your best bet here. Yes, I know it takes a while to dry, but if you're like most hobbyers, you got more than one project going on at one time, so you can afford the wait time. Is possible. You will have to make some slight adjustments for the trim piece to the bottom piece. It happens. It's not that big a deal. It's why I like using PVA over hot glue. You have that work time to adjust and move stuff around if need be. Now, once we get this set, we are going to have to take care of those hard edges from when we were cutting with the X-Acto blade. Thus, we used the lighter again. We're not going for like a hardcore melt like we did on the first piece. We just want to actually smooth out the hard edge and to make it look more smooth and natural, like it was burned with acid. Of course, it's the next day, I think, and the glue is dried, and so we're doing everybody's favorite step, black Mod Podge. Again, of course, everybody knows the black Mod Podge, black paint, craft paint mixed with Mod Podge. Just want to give this 100% coverage to protect the foam somewhat. Does it work? I think so, yes. It does seem to be a little bit stronger once it's on, but I honestly don't know 100%, but I do it anyway because of the black. Kind of like a primer coat, and it does keep the green foam from showing through. Okay, this is another pretty simple step. Now that the black Mod Podge is dry, we're going to give it a base coat. I like to do 100% coverage with the base coat, and I am using an Apple Barrel dark blue gray. Do you have to use a particular brand or color? No, you can use whatever color you want. When you make your tiles, you make them yours. But these are my tiles, so I'm making them mine. It's pretty simple. I go for 100% coverage. I don't like to leave little bits of black showing through because the future steps are going to take care of that anyway. So, like I said, I go for 100% coverage on my base coats. Okay, now with this step, you can completely skip if you want to. It is completely unnecessary. I like to do it because, let's face it, when have you ever seen just a gray rock or stone? Stone and rock has color in it. Browns, greens, reds, blues. I've even seen purples. So I like to put a little streak of color into when I do stonework, like dungeon tiles and stuff. In the end, it doesn't really show up that much, but if you actually see them in real life, you will see the slight variations of color in the stones, and to me it just makes a difference. I'm actually using Deco Art True Ochre in this, Apple Barrel Kelly Green, and Deco Art Rockwood Red. Do you have to use these colors? No. Well, like I've said before, when you do your tiles or whatever you're making, make it yours. But these are mine, so I'm going to do it the way I do it because, again, they're mine, so I like to put little splashes of color. But again, this is a completely unnecessary step if you don't want to do it. In this step, I'm adding the mid-tone, which is Apple Barrel's Pewter Gray. I've always liked that because it just seems like a good mid-tone gray. I'm going for a roughly 50% coverage with this. Basically a heavy dry brush, or, well, let's face it, it's an overbrush, not an actual dry brush. Just get it on, get a decent coat, leaving several. Don't go for the deep areas with this. If you go any harder than what I'm doing here, you're not doing an overbrush, you're brushing it on. And of course here I'm adding the third gray, which is Apple Barrel's Granite Gray. It's been my go-to for highlighting and dry brushing. And you're actually using makeup brush I got at the Dollar Tree. Very cheap makeup brushes make the best dry brush brushes for terrain. I cannot say that enough. But again, you don't have to use this color. If you don't want to, make it your way. And of course with this stuff, I'm giving the tiles a wash. I use a homemade brown wash, unlike most people who tend to use black. I prefer the brown mainly because it gives the tiles a dirtier look than what black will. And the brown wash will still get in there to the deep recesses and give it a bit of shading. So again, I prefer a dark brown wash to black. That's just my personal choice. Now that the wash has dried overnight, I like to give my washes a good bit to dry. It's time to do one final highlight dry brush with the Apple Barrel Granite Gray. Again, that's my choice of color. I want to bring the edges back up and give it a brighter appearance somewhat than just the straight up brown wash. As you can see the difference between the two. Again, what colors you use is up to you. These are the colors that I use. It's just what I prefer. Okay, now that all the dry brushing is done, we can start getting to the fun part. I'm using everybody's go-to for putting in bubbles, bling stickers or half spherical stickers. You can get these at the dollar stores, Walmart, any craft store worth its salt has them. But these make perfect bubbles and mud, water, all different types of things. But for this, they're going to be acid bubbles. Don't want to actually put them in any sort of pattern, because the second you put in a pattern, the second it just does not look good. If a pattern's though, just put them in random ways. If you want to keep yourself to a certain amount, I only put 4 in each tile there. But I didn't really pay attention to where I was sticking them. I just stuck them in. That's all I did. And in this step, it's just pretty simple. I don't want silver bubbles, so I'm going to be painting them with Citadel's Contrast Hex-Wraith Flame. I said, for what I'm doing, silver bubbles just aren't going to work. So, have to add some color. Again, you can use whatever color you want. This is just my choice. And sometimes we don't like the choices we make, which you'll see in a few moments. Now we're at the fun part. What we need is 5-minute epoxy here. I'm using Super Glue brand 5-minute epoxy, little tubes available at Dollar Tree. I'm also using burnt umber ink from Liquitex and green yellow ink from Liquitex as well, both acrylic inks. I'm also going to be using some isopropyl alcohol. IPA or rubbing alcohol, whichever you want to call it. Now, you're going to need something for mixing. Lollipop sticks, whatever you want to call them, coffee stir sticks. I'm using a lollipop stick for this. Or not a lollipop stick, but a popsicle stick. But again, you can get these at craft stores, dollar stores, anywhere really. Now, once I got the tips cut off, squeeze it into the little mixing cup that I'm going to be using. This one actually worked pretty well. Normally they're stiff and hard, but this one just went so fast, so quick, which is honestly unusual for this brand of 5-minute epoxy. And of course, I'm going to add 2 drops of the green-yellow ink, and then I am going to add a single drop of the burnt umber ink. This just gives it like a dirty, nasty look, but also somewhat of a brightness, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Of course, you want to thoroughly mix it up. Once it starts turning to have like a silver hue to it, then you know you've gotten it mixed to the point where it's thoroughly mixed. And it will create a tiny bit of heat, not much though, which is why you don't want to pour this stuff too thick, because if you pour this stuff too thick, it's gonna boil and bubble up like a styrofoam almost. Now I'm adding alcohol to this at about a 50-50 mix of alcohol to epoxy. This makes it flow better and slightly extends the usability of the epoxy itself. Once you get it thoroughly mixed up, it'll start to flow somewhat good. Once you get to that magical point, you can actually start pouring it in, which is what I'm doing right now. And I want to scrape out the last little bits because, well, I'm cheap. I don't want to waste anything. You shouldn't want to waste anyhow. But you can use the popsicle stick to spread it around. You want to get everything, every last little nook and cranny in there. And for this, I want to splash a little bit up on the edges too, just to seem like, you know, it's starting to work its way out and burn away more stuff and whatnot. It does for a good effect. Now you're seeing me fiddle with this quite a bit. While there are major advantages to using 5-minute epoxy for small pours like this, there is one big disadvantage. You have very little time to use it. The reason it says 5-minute epoxy is you only got 5 minutes. Now adding the alcohol, while it improves its flowability and does extend its usability somewhat, not by much though, you're still incredibly limited on time as far as using this. So if you can't do it fast and quick and get it to where you want it by making the small little adjustments and pushing it around and whatnot, don't use it. This stuff is very unforgiving. Once it starts setting up, that's it. It's done. But as you can see, I managed to get it done, and I'm happy with the results. I may look at it a little bit and it's like, you know what, I'm not too completely happy, LOL. But I will get it to a point where I like it. It's been 5 minutes, and this is why I like 5-minute epoxy. It's cured, solid, ready to go on the table. That's the big advantage of it. Now, something I noticed from earlier when I used the one contrast paint, I didn't like the color, so I went and got the Mantis Warriors Green. It's a darker shade, and it works better for what I wanted. And there it is, amongst some regular dungeon tiles, along with some other pit traps. But you can pull out a 3x3 tile and just plop this down, and you're good to go. You have your trap.
Hey, if you made it this far, thanks for watching the whole way to the end. I appreciate you watching. Eventually, I'm going to put out more and more videos. If everything goes right, click like dislike, that doesn't matter. I'm not worried about the almighty algorithm. If you want to see more, hit subscribe. If you don't want to see more, then don't. But I hope you enjoyed what you did see. There will be more.